you. I was expecting you. Yes, I'm ready for my interview. Where do I begin? At the beginning. Well, I don't really remember that much about the beginning, but I was born in 1858 in Norway, although my family is Danish. My father was Norwegian and my mother was a Dane. I don't really remember much about Norway or Denmark, other than the fact that it was cold. Very, very, very cold. And other than that, I don't. But I do remember one thing. I remember my papa getting letters from his dear friend, Ardent Jensen. Ardent had migrated to this big, wild country called America. And he had settled in a small territory called Nevada. Papa was enamored by his wonderful letters from his friend. He would go and he would read them to us over and over, and we could see the life that Ardent and his family were living in a small little town called Gardnerville in the Carson Valley. Papa got the bug, and off we went. Papa decided he was going to move us to America. We decided to board a ship and come
in America. So we made the crossing. Now, if anybody has ever told you that the crossing was easy, they're a liar. Or they're a fool. Or they were drunk the entire time. It was horrible. We were crammed down into the hold of the ship. It was dark. It was crowded. There was sickness and so many bodies just so close to us for months. It was horrible. And the stench. Oh, good Lord. The smell of bodies. The smell of people being sick right next to you. The smell of other people's just closeness. It was awful. Mama was sick. Daddy got sick. My brothers and my sister all got sick. But good old Anna. Papa always said I was born, and good Norwegian stock I was. And I was able to help take care of them. I brought them as fresh water, our limited rations. I cleaned up after them the best I could for 10 years old. It was quite a chore. We sailed, and we sailed, and we sailed, and we sailed, and finally we came around the Cape of Good Hope. Sorry, wrong one, Cape of Horn. We didn't go around Africa, we came back and went around South America. And we landed in San Francisco. Oh, what a difference that made in my life. Ladies walking around in fancy dresses, men promenading with them on their arms. I just kind of looked at them out the little motel window that we were in. Wow. My sister Paulina, oh, sweet dear little Paulina, she was 8. And she says, Anna, you need to get you one of those dresses. I just laughed. I says, Lena, can you imagine me sitting on our little 3-legged milk stool in that kind of a dress? I'd fall off into the cow muck. That always made her giggle. She loved that. Papa decided to move east, and we took our possessions off the ship. We bought a wagon and a team and a horse, and we headed east. We settled in the gold fields of Silver Fork on the American River. Papa was a lumberman, and he was able to get a job working in the mill, and then eventually he became the manager, and he was the top man on the totem pole there for a while. We lived in a tent Now, coming from Norway, we had this beautiful little log cabin. It had a sod roof. The goats would graze up there. It was wonderful. And now I lived in a tent house. It was quite different for a 10-year-old. So, to make it more homey, Papa brought some of the lumber from the mill, and he made us a floor. So now when it rained, we weren't sleeping in the mud. And when it was snowing, it wasn't quite as cold. And our little tent house, it even had a little wood-burning stove in it. I thought that was quite clever how they did that. We got all the scraps from the lumber mill, and we could have a fire anytime we wanted to. And we didn't have to bother Papa to go get wood. So it worked out really well. While we were there, a friend of Papa's from Norway used to visit us. He'd come periodically. In the summertime, he'd come, and he'd have his little Norwegian draft horse pulling his wagon. Mr. Thompson was such a nice man. He was so nice, and he was so tall. Oh my goodness, he was so tall. And his little Norwegian fjord horse, Ian, he was just so special, and I'd go steal some of Mama's carrots out of the garden just so he and I could be friends. Such a sweet horse. And then Mr. Thompson would come in the winter. He would carry the mail from the eastern side of the Sierras across to the Central Valley. Such a strong man. And in the winter, he wouldn't even have a wagon. He'd have a pack on his back. And he'd come with these skis that they must have been twice my height. They were so tall and so skinny, just like we used to ski in Norway. It was just like that. It was amazing. And then one winter, when it was particularly heavy snow, he showed up at our tent with basket shoes. I never did quite understand that whole concept, but somehow I think he became famous because of those basket shoes. Somehow I just thought so. It was fun. He'd always bring letters from Mr. Jensen in the Carson Valley. And Mr. Jensen would write these glowing letters about how beautiful it was and how fruitful that valley was. And the wandering river, oh, he said it was just beautiful. So, in the spring of 1878, Papa decided to move us to Carson Valley. So we hooked up the wagon again, and Papa's horse, and he was either riding the wagon and leading the horse, or riding the horse and Mama was driving the wagon, and we set off east again. We came up over the mountains, and at one point, we came to a spot in the granite where there were tracks woven into the rocks. And I asked Papa, how did that happen? And he says, you see the rims on these wagon wheels? They're metal. And the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of wagons that have come across here wore those tracks into that granite. It was amazing. We came a little further, excuse me. We came just a wee bit further, and there were tracks this deep where the wagon ruts were. And as we came along and we came up out of a little forest, all of a sudden the tracks just stopped. And I looked at Papa and I said, what? Where did they go? And he says, get down off the wagon, Anna, and I'll show you. And he took me by the hand and he walked me over. And we looked down.
Oh.
There was a cliff. It was a huge cliff, but the wagon tracks went right to the cliff. And I looked at him, and he says, not to worry, not to worry. It was easy for him to say. He said, what they're going to do is they're going to take our supplies, and they're going to put them in those big nets like we had on the ship. Do you remember those nets? I said, yes. So he put all of our supplies from the wagon in that big net. And these men, they would lower those nets down to where the ground was flat again. I thought, okay, that works. But the wagon is still here. He says, not to worry. So we unhitched the team, Jenny and Gars. He was Norwegian, can I say. Jenny and Gars were unhitched, and Papa's horse, and the men tied those big ropes around that wagon, lashed it around a couple of big old pine trees next to that rut, and lowered our wagon to the ground. I didn't have any hope for that, because when I looked over that cliff, there were little pieces and parts of wagons all over. I was very, very nervous. I'm thinking, oh dear. The men were great. It was an excellent, excellent transition. We led the mules and the horses down a little skinnier track, down to the valley floor, loaded our goods back in our wagon, hooked up Jenny and Garsh. Papa climbed on his horse and off we went again. It was quite the transition. We camped that night in a little beautiful valley, and I asked Papa, is this Carson Valley? And that night during dinner he says, no. He says, this is called Hope Valley. Beautiful, beautiful little valley. I says, Papa, can we just stay here? I was pretty much done with traveling. And I asked, he says, no, we're going to go on to Carson Valley. And then he told us why the valley was called Hope Valley. Hope Valley was actually named by a soldier. Their troop had come through the area, and 3 of their soldiers in 1855 had lost their lives at a place called Tragedy Springs. And when that happened, this one particular soldier, Mr. Bidwell, he got to Hope Valley and he was so happy because the trail was no longer treacherous that he went ahead and he says, I think we ought to call this Hope Valley. And the name stuck. Well, as other pioneers came along in that area, they also ended up naming 2 other little valleys that are next to it. One of them is Faith, and the other one is Charity. Papa explained that those were named by good Christian people because those are the 3 virtues of the Bible. So we have hope, charity, and faith valleys. We continued on our saga, as us Norwegians like to call it, and came down into Carson Valley. We came across a trail that was called the Immigrant Trail. It was on the foothills of this valley, and we had such a view. It was so beautiful. Oh, my heart was so excited that this was even more beautiful than Hope Valley. I didn't think it would happen. And we finally pulled into the little settlement of Genoa in 1878. It was so, so exciting. Papa rode across the valley to Gardnerville and let his friends, the Jetsons, know we were in town. And they all came over and helped us. They brought lumber and all sorts of things, and Mrs. Jensen brought Mama a trunk full of wonderful household goods. It was so sweet of them. They had been expecting us for so long, and they helped us build a house and several little cabins that we could rent out to the travelers that came back and forth. We had miners, we had all sorts of different travelers that came through the area. And soon Mama was off to buy a cow or 2, a few chickens, and of course, some goats. Even though we didn't have grass on the roof, we needed goats. Mama back in Norway was an excellent, excellent cheesemaker. And she made exquisite butter. So she had to have her cows, and she had to have her goats. And once Mama got her garden put in, she looked at my Papa and said, I'm home. I'm home. I'm here. And life was good. We started growing a garden, raising animals, and we ended up selling a lot of it to teamsters that were taking supplies up into the Comstock and up to other mining areas. So we made a pretty good living at that. But the gold rush was still kind of going on in the Motherlode area. So Papa and my brother Chris decided to go back over the hill. Hill, we called it. At least they weren't taking a wagon.
Yeah.
They went back over, and they left my little brother, Chris. Oh, I guess I better tell you, both of my brothers were named Chris. The oldest was Christopher, and the little one was Christian. Mama called him that because he was a surprise gift from God. He was a special young man, but he was so upset that he couldn't go with his bigger brother and his papa. So we had to keep him amused. Lena and I did that. Mostly it fell on Paulina, my beautiful sister Lena. She had to keep him amused while Mama and I did the farm and milked and stuff, and I never did get that dress. Thank goodness. Life kept going, and Papa would come home every fall. And before you know it, I was 18 years old. And Lena, my beautiful sister Lena, she was 16. And so beautiful. Fair face, beautiful blonde hair, eyes that shone like topaz. Absolutely a gorgeous little girl. And because we spent a lot of time with the Jensen family, on picnics and family outings, there was a time when she and Ardent Jensen's son Aaron could be seen sitting in the shade, sharing a laugh, sharing a quiet moment, talking to each other. And then Aaron started coming to dinner. And one afternoon he came early. And he and Papa sat on the porch for almost 2 hours. Aaron looking all nervous and scared, and Papa nodding in his way. We came in, we had dinner, and as we were clearing the table off, Papa raises up, takes his glass, and hits it with his fork. He says, I have an announcement to make. I have given young Aaron Jensen permission to marry Paulina. Paulina gasped. Aaron got down on one knee. And through tears of joy, which I could tell were definitely tears of joy, she said yes. And they were married. Lena being a sweet, sweet 16-year-old girl. And they moved to Gardnerville. I missed my sister. She and I we were best friends for so many years, 18 years of my life. I keep bothering Mama and say, Mama, don't we need something over in Gardnerville at the store? How about some more cheesecloth for the cheese? How about some muslin for our food sacks for the vegetables? Mama, I really need some new ribbons for my hair. And every once in a while I would jump on our horse and ride across the valley to go see Paulina. I so missed that girl, I really did. It was amazing. Also in 1878, Papa was home for the fall. He'd come back from the gold country for a little while, and he invited a gentleman to our home for dinner. His name was Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris, during dinner, told his life story to us all. He was born in Missouri in 1825. He came to California with the gold rush, and he made a pretty good living. Actually, he made a darn good living. And he started buying goods and supplies for the miners, and he would go back and forth between Sacramento and the gold camps, supplying the miners. And then in 1851, he decided he'd come over the Sierras with it. Let's see how that goes. So in 1851, he brought his first pack train across the Sierras with goods. And after his fashion, he opened up a little store in Sheridan, Nevada, and it was called Harris and Nathan. Never did know who Nathan was. Anyway, he had that there, and that was until 1876, I believe it was. 1876. Then he decided to open up a little mercantile in Genoa. So he was a businessman in the area. And he came to dinner and he told us all about how his adventures were successful and he was a great businessman. And then he went home. Okay. A couple weeks later, Papa invited him back again. And they sat on the porch.
Oh.
But only an hour. Only an hour. And then they came in for dinner and we had dinner. And as we were clearing up the dishes, Papa stands up again, clanks his glass, and says, I have an announcement. I have granted my blessings to Mr. Harris to wed my daughter, Anna. I looked at Mama. Mama looked at me. I was speechless. Absolutely speechless. Well, no wonder. The man was 33 years my senior. I was 18 years old. And this man was 33 years my senior. And after Mr. Harris left that evening, Mama and I both talked to Papa. Papa, how can you do this? Papa. And Mama would say, now, she's just a child. You can't have her marry a man that old. And Papa says, none of this, none of this. I gave Mr. Harris my word. Well, come to find out, Mr. Harris had a son. His name was Abraham, and he was 2 years old. And Mr. Harris was recently widowed, and his daughter, Cecilia, who was 1 year older than I was taking care of Abraham. But Cecilia got married and was moving to Washington. Mr. Harris did not have anybody to take care of baby Abraham. So on the day that I was wed that fall in 1878, I not only became a bride, I became a mother.
Wow.
And not in the way you're thinking. I became a mother to little Abraham. He was a good child. He was a little skittish, I would say, but he'd lost his mom. And now the only other person that he really knew well, his sister, was gone. And here was this stranger standing there to take care of him, his little self. So I took care of Abraham, and occasionally, very occasionally, Mose, we called him Mose. His name was Morris, but we called him Mose. Mose would let me take care of the store, only for a couple of hours. And during that time, a little girl who lived across the street would come over, and she would bring her pennies, and she would buy candy. She loved her candy. She was a very, very, very smart child. Very gregarious. Knew what she wanted at a young age. She wanted to go on to university. She wanted to be good and take care of her community. So even if she came in without any money, I'd give her some candy. We became good friends. We became good friends. And boy, did that little girl love candy. Her name was Lillian Virgin Finnegan. And she was responsible in 1919 for founding the Genoa Candy Dance. She and I were friends. I'd like to think that maybe I influenced that in her a little bit. I think I influenced that. I do have to say, though, that life with Mose was different. Very different. You see, Mose, he was different. He would still have his wanderlust and take off and, go trading and whatever else he did. And so many times I'd have to go get him out of the local saloon. I'd have to go gather him up many a night. And there he was, in his cups, blubbering and drooling all over hussy Julia Belay. Oh, that woman. She was so beguiling, and she was such a temptress. Why, I thought that woman could actually charm a giant redwood into laying down and becoming toothpicks. She was so bewitching. Then I really resented her. And then I realized it wasn't Julia's fault. It was not Julia's fault. Julia was a very charming woman, and she would come visit in Genoa and do her entertaining at the saloon. But it wasn't her fault. It was the alcohol that these men were consuming that made them such fools. Married men who would slather and bobble and curtsy and kowtow to this woman. They lost their heads. So basically, I began to understand Julia more, and I read in the paper that at one time, she actually did a lot of good for her city, Virginia City. She held fundraisers to raise money for the fire department. She's held other fundraisers for different charities, orphans, and other things. And I began to respect her. I did. In fact, when Mose, on a very rare occasion, would let me come to the Comstock with him, we would stay at a hotel called the Vesey House. And when Mose got up to the Comstock, word got around, and Julia found out that I was down here. So she'd come down and we'd have tea. And we learned a lot from each other. A lot. But Mose, still, with the wanderlust, he'd take off every fall or every spring, be gone all summer. He'd hook up his wagon and his 6th team, and off he'd go down south on the toll road, up and over Jack Wright Pass, and out of Aurora Hudson Road down to Bodie, and Aurora, and Lundy, and Mono Mills. And at Mono Mills, he would be empty by then with his supplies, and he would pick up lumber and run up and down the canyon, Railroad Canyon, to Bodie with supplies of lumber to help provide Bodie with the shoring for the mines. And then he'd come home in the fall. Now, while he was gone, you'd think that he'd let me take care of the store? No. He'd have his friends come and take care of the store. Within a couple weeks, the store was empty. Mama would take us in, destitute, me and all the children. We had 6 children between us, Mose and I did. Our first was Emma. Emma was such a sweet girl. Nice round face, and as Papa loved to say, good Norwegian stock. She was very kind and very sweet. That was in, what was that? That was 1879, give or take. And then our second child was born, Joseph. Josie. He was the love of my life. Such a sweet, sweet little boy. And he was fair, beautiful golden blonde curls, beautiful blue eyes, such a little love. His laughter touched my soul. Fever took Josie when he was just 3 years old. I was devastated. He was my life. He was my life. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know how to respond. I took to my bed. I refused to eat. How could I go on with the little songbird that sung to my soul gone? How can I do that? I lay in bed for several weeks, wouldn't eat. I'd pretty much given up. And then one day Mama came into my room, flung open the curtains, and said, "It's time. I've let you grieve. You've had your time, but you've got 2 young children who need you. You've got a husband that definitely needs you. You've got me, and I need you. I need you to help me with the garden and the milking and everything else." And immediately when she flung those curtains over, I reached under the bed and grabbed the bedpan and retched. You see, I was pregnant with our 3rd child, Morris Jr. I was pregnant again with Morris. I did need to get up. I did need to get going. I had a family that needed me. And although I'll never, ever get over the loss of Josie, ever, I had to get on. And Papa would say I was good Norwegian stock, so I had to move on. Soon after Morris was born, we had Emma. Emma was a sweet little girl. Not quite as strong as, we had Hannah. Not quite as strong as Emma, but she was a good little girl. And then came the twins. Samuel and Platchek. We called him Pat for short. So it was Sam and Pat. Sam and Pat. They were hard to handle from the day they were born. They were quite the challenge. And then Mose would take off again, like he did every year, and go off with his team and spend the summer away from us while we worked, myself and Mama. And Mama was getting older. Mama couldn't quite do everything every time. Emma would help with the little ones. She could. Abraham was getting older and he could help some. But what were we to do? Mose was gone. Again he left the store with these people. And again the store went under, and when Mose would get back, he'd have to borrow money to get the store up and running again. He was getting further and further and further in debt. And when we'd finally get the store up and it'd start to turn a profit, he'd be across the street at the saloon, drinking up whatever profit we might have had. I didn't know what to do. I was beside myself. I had 6 children, 5 of my own and Abraham. Mama was getting on in years. I just didn't know what to do. And finally, when he left in the spring of 1891, I took it upon myself. I thought, well, I'm going to have to be strong. I'm going to have to be the leader in this family. So I went and I talked to some people on the Douglas County Commission. I talked to them and I begged them and I pleaded with them, and I wanted my own store. I wanted my own store, but it was unheard of. I was a woman. Women didn't own stores. Women didn't have property. Women didn't have business licenses. And I begged with them, and I pleaded with them. And they said, well, we have to give you a proficiency test. So they gave me a proficiency test. I had to prove to them that I could read. I had to prove to them that I could write, and write legibly. And I had to prove to them that I could do my sums.
Of course.
And one of them actually kind of laughed and giggled and said, she does that better than Mose does. So, on November 9th, 1891, through the Douglas County Commissioners, and I think with a wee little bit of help from Judge Finnegan, I think it helped a lot. And I think my dear friend Lily kind of persuaded that. But I was granted a sole proprietorship license.
Yay.
Landmark in Douglas County. And possibly in the whole state of Nevada for 1891.
Yes.
I was thrilled. I was thrilled. But now what to do with it? Mama was getting up there in age. Mama couldn't do much anymore. And unfortunately that spring, she passed away in 1892.
Oh.
And because Papa had passed away a couple of years earlier in 1890, the property fell to me in Genoa. The big house, the rental cabins, the gardens, and the little bit of a ranch that we had there, it fell to me. And I thought, now's my chance. Now is my chance. Mose was getting more and more weak. Mose was a lot less, more coherent. He was babbling. And so basically I had 7 children. I took a gamble. I sold the house. I sold the property. I sold the cabins. I sold the farm. And I bought a little house in Gardnerville. And we moved across the valley. And all of the Jensen family came out, and with the money that I had from the property in Genoa, I was able to raise a building. And it was now, in 1893, that I opened the doors to A. Harris and Sons Mercantile. It was such a day. I was so excited. I tended the store, and Abraham and Mose Jr. helped. Hannah took care of the kids, and Hannah helped me in the store. And then Emma, who was getting older, also helped with the twins. Oh, I do bless that child. Those boys were incorrigible. One day I'm standing in the store, and the door slams open. That's possible. And in comes Mrs. Brown with Platchek by the collar, dragging him. And puts him down in front of me, and she says, "This young ruffian was trying to turn over my outhouse, along with his brother." And as soon as she said that, Samuel come bounded through the door, saw Mrs. Brown, turned on his heel, and I grabbed him. Apparently the boys had been up to some hijinks. And as I'm standing there listening to Mrs. Brown berate me and my mothering, experience and, how good of a mother I was, outside the door, I caught a glimpse of 2 of the Settlemeyer boys, who were famous for tipping over outhouses in the Carson Valley. And I thought, okay. I knew my boys weren't inherently bad, but they were scamps. So for a week or so, they had to report to Mrs. Brown. They pulled weeds, they had to chop kindling, they helped her wash the lower windows. I put them to work for her to show them that you just don't go around destroying somebody's property. You just don't do that. They stayed up for a while. Life went on for us. It really did. And then in 1896, Mose took ill. He finally passed that winter, just before 1897. Doc said it was probably because his insides were pickled. And he said, and if it wasn't pickled on the inside, it was his brain.
Oh.
He passed away, and we laid him to rest in the Jewish section of the Carson City Cemetery. May he rest in peace. Life went on, and so did we. We kept the store open. We were making a profit. It wasn't getting dragged up. That was a novel idea. We had a good life. The boys were getting older. Hannah and Emma, the girls, were taking care, probably one in each hand, of the twins. We really did succeed, and it was a good feeling. And then in 1898, a gentleman walked through my door of the store. He was very dapper, he was very handsome, and he was a very good businessman. His name was Fritz Bierman, and he was a very, very, very kind man, very kind. He owned 2 saloons, one in Gardnerville and one in the town of Minden. And he owned the only ice cream parlor in the Carson Valley.
Oh.
I was smitten by him. How can you not fall for a man that has an ice cream parlor? He was wonderful. And I think he was smitten with me a wee bit too. He invited me on picnics, and we'd go in his beautiful little French surrey out to the Carson River and have a picnic. And he took me up to Piper's Opera House for an opera. I'd never been to an opera. That's a lot of singing. And he was very, very kind to me and to my children. He was a wonderful man. And in 1898 or 99, we were married. We were married. Now Fritz had a very interesting look on business. Now, normally when a woman marries a man, she and her property go to that man. Pretty standard back in the day. Fritz didn't think so. Fritz wanted me to keep the mercantile. He allowed me to keep the mercantile. Even though I was married to him, I was no longer Anna Harris. I was Anna Margaret Olson Harris Bierman. And that was who I was. And Fritz, he was such a wonderful man, generous man. We got on a stage, and he took me to Reno. And in Reno, not to get married, into Reno, and in Reno we caught a train. I'd never been on a train. And we went all the way to Sacramento, and then we traveled further to San Francisco. That was our honeymoon. And he bought me these beautiful pearl earrings. He spoiled me rotten. He brought me some beautiful dresses. And I said, I don't know what I'm going to do with these dresses. Definitely not melt pounds. He was such a wonderful, wonderful man. Absolutely wonderful. And he was wonderful to my children. He was kind and generous. And even to the grandchildren as they started coming along. He was a wonderful stepfather and step-grandfather. I couldn't praise him enough. And then in 1906, my heart was broken again. Abraham, now 31, and Morris Jr., now 21, decided it was time for them to make their way in the world. So they both loaded up these big Teamster wagons, headed out, and up and over the hill. It broke my heart, because I relived all of those times that I would see the back of the wagon with Mose driving off and knowing that our life would be in a shambles again by the time he came home. The boys were headed toward a small town in the southern desert of Nevada called Rhyolite. It's a little town outside of the area they call Death Valley, and it was the booming mining town of its day in 1906, and they started a mercantile. Harris Brothers Mercantile. And they were very successful. They learned from their mama. They were very successful. I was so proud of them and stuff. It was just, it did my heart good to see my children growing, to be successful. Hannah was now married and having babies. To be a grandma, it was wonderful. Pat and Sam were still Pat and Sam. Pat and Sam. But life was really good. I was so, so blessed. So blessed. Excuse me?
The date? It's December 3rd, 1938. I'm sorry, what was that? Yes, St. Peter. I'm ready.